So what we're going to look at today is we're going to compare and contrast natural selection and selective breeding. Are they really all that different? What do they rely on in terms of genetics to actually function? And basically we're going to sequence how they happen. So the first thing I want to go through is how natural selection works. With any population, you're going to have some variety, so a range of alleles for a particular phenotype. And if we were to just focus on one phenotype, for example, fish colour, like we did in the work example that you've done this week, in an original population, over time there will be more than just one type of colour of fish. So how does that actually come about? How do we get that variation in phenotypes in the first place, so that range of alleles for one particular characteristic?
The mutations.
Mutations. So basically we're relying on random mutations in what process? In which cell division? It has to be in one of the type. We're talking about
Meiosis.
Yeah, it has to be one of those. So we're talking about multicellular organisms here, not things that divide by binary fission. So which one, mitosis or meiosis, does this have to occur in for there to be variation that we see throughout a population?
Meiosis.
Good. So it's in meiosis. That's a really key point. If it doesn't happen in meiosis, then the gametes aren't different, so therefore it can't make the whole organism different. Alright? So key things we've got there, mutations and meiosis. Alright, so this leads to variation within the population. So you've got a variety of new characteristics. The only way that you can actually see a mutation is if new what are formed? Still the same gene, but new alleles. Good. You need to have, in here, new alleles. If they aren't new alleles, then that means they're not being expressed as anything different. They're just a random mutation that hasn't affected it, or a random mutation which has terminated the gamete. So it has to have new alleles. This is really important. Okay, this variation within the population is absolutely vital for the process of natural selection. If there wasn't variation, you don't get natural selection. If conditions change that wipe out everything with a certain characteristic and there is no variation, then all of them die. What the variation allows for is if circumstances change, for example, a new predator enters the ecosystem, or a new competitor, or the ozone layer gets thinner, so more UV is getting through, or a volcano erupts so the air is more acidic and so is the soil. Anything like that, anything that changes in the environment will create a pressure on the population. If it wasn't for this variation, chances are the population could die out. So if that's the only population of that species becomes extinct. But because there's variation due to the processes in meiosis and sexual reproduction, so the fertilization part, then some of the population are going to survive and change. So I'm going to call it environmental pressure. It's where something in the environment, whether it's abiotic, not living, so the weather, acidity, whatever, or something biotic, something living, competitor, parasite, predator, competitors, predators, and parasites. They are environmental pressures, all right, abiotic or biotic. They put pressure on the population, some of the members of the population. Alright, so that's another one of our key ideas. That creates a change in the population. And the phrase that I really like for this is, those individuals in the population best suited to the environmental change will survive and have a better chance of having successful offspring. Right? So the key ideas there were ones that are best suited, are able to reproduce and have successful offspring. And it's this having successful offspring for that environmental pressure, to survive that environmental pressure, that leads to this thing we call natural selection. The environment has selected, and by natural means, for those offspring which are most likely to succeed in that changed environment. If the environment doesn't change, the population doesn't change. If the environment changes and there's some pressure, then the population will change. So what you'll see is that the frequency of certain alleles will change. So in our worked example, we went from brightly coloured fish to most of the fish, same species, but most of the fish become dull because of all these predators that arrived. They had really good eyesight, colour eyesight. So you could see the brightly coloured fish very easily, ate them, left the dull coloured ones alone. The dull coloured ones were now best suited for that environment. Now, in the ultimate case of this, sometimes you could argue that a new species is created. A new species is one where the alleles have changed or been selected for so much that now the original population cannot breed with the new population. So that's where we could argue that it's a new species being formed. Therefore, natural selection is basically the driving force, the mechanism by which the theory of evolution works. Okay, so I'm going to write that down there because that's a theory you need to understand a little bit about. Alright, we're going to stop there.